Hi, I'm Lance Lambert. Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Vehicle Show. We are in Los Angeles, California at the Petersen Automotive Museum. Many people in the world think that this is the best automotive museum everywhere, bar none, and I think we're in that team. This is a great place. And this great place is run in part by Leslie Kendall. How are you, Leslie?
Lance, doing great. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for having us come in here. This is great.
Our pleasure.
We filmed here about 8 years ago and had a great time, and it just seemed like time to do it again, so here we are.
Anytime.
All right. Tell us a little bit about the museum.
Well, the Petersen Museum was the idea of Robert and Margie Petersen. Mr. Petersen founded Hot Rod, Motor Trend, and dozens of other enthusiast magazines, and he thought it was time that Los Angeles had a place to celebrate the automobile.
And it's an icon of museums, but part of the reason is it has a little of everything. You have hot rods here, you have incredible classics here, you have some very unusual things here.
Well, we try to give people lots of different things to think about when they come to the museum. We show cars in a couple of different ways. Our first floor, every car is in a gigantic diorama, so people can see the cars in their context. They can see how cars relate to their environments and what they meant. Then you come up to the second floor, we have very, very large galleries that rotate. And these galleries can be anything from muscle cars to lowriders to French cars to you name it. We have the world at our disposal when it comes to cars. So people could then come up to the second floor and they can see, you know, all different kinds of things. And unlike a lot of museums, we rotate our cars. We have a very active exhibit rotation program that if you come back at least a couple of times a year, you're probably going to see 70 or 80% different cars.
What's the most popular display you've had here, do you think?
We've had a lot of popular displays, but I think I mentioned lowriders. I think that was an extremely popular display because you don't normally associate that kind of culture with automobile enthusiasm, but they certainly are linked.
This is a long ways from a lowrider.
This is about as different from a lowrider as you can get. Yeah. This is a 1937 Delage D-8 120, and this car is part of our current Fins exhibition. The Fin craze started somewhere, and that was in France in the 1930s when people started experimenting with Art Deco design themes and a lot of other what they considered very modernistic appearance tweaks to their cars.
Power plant on this, and obviously the average Joe didn't buy this car back then.
Well, the average Joe did not buy this car. Absolutely right. This is powered by a straight 8, about 4.5 liter engine, and it was said in the 30s that a man was driven in a Rolls, a man drove an Alfa, but a man gave to his mistress a Delage. Oh. So this is something pretty special.
It is. I like that. Well, speaking of special and speaking of fins, you have something here. A few of the viewers may have seen it in the past, but we're talking about crazy fins. Let's go take a look at it.
Let's do it.
All right. A 1952 Spohn. This is a very unique ugly duckling car. This is pretty interesting, and the fins those are fins.
Well, it does take a special person to appreciate this car, but you have to understand the circumstances that surrounded it. Right after World War II, fins were all the rage. Cadillac debuted them in 1948, and other manufacturers couldn't wait to put them on their cars just so that they can be up with the times. But for people whose tastes were a little bit more extreme than others, they would have cars built to their own specification. And the fellow that owned this car originally was a U.S. Air Force pilot who gave his 1940 Ford, the Spohn. Spohn threw away the body, built this body, and gave it back to him in 1952. And you'll see there's an awful lot of American in this car, even though it was built by a German coach builder. For example, the fins are almost exact replicas of the 1951 General Motors LeSabre that Harley Earl was so famous for. It just shows how people shared inspiration in the day and how really the sky was the limit.
So the bones on this are 40 Ford.
The bones on this are 1940 Ford, flathead engine, not much to it, but you had reliable American underpinnings. This was not an exotic European car, so it could be serviced anywhere.
Was Spohn a person or a carriage house?
Well, both. Started out as a person, gave his name to the carriage house. They built bodies for Maybachs and Mercedes and very large German and European cars before the war. Became very, very famous for doing that. And after the war, there wasn't a market for very, very large Mercedes. The economy was decimated, so they sought other means of remaining viable, and they turned to customizing cars like this. And if you didn't like these fins, you could get fins that look like a 52 Cadillac. You could get fins that look like anything that you could dream up. They would build it for you.
As long as you brought your checkbook, you were good.
Bring your checkbook or a lot of big stack of US dollars.
Yeah. Well, the fascinating car. I love it in all its peculiarities. There's a car next to it that's peculiar and outrageous, but I like the design a little bit better. But again, we're talking about some serious fins. In fact, when we walk by, let's be careful we don't get our arms cut off.
Yeah, watch where you're walking.
Okay. I have a hunch if you took a 59 Chrysler and a 51 Ford and put them together, you'd kind of come up with this. These are some serious fins here.
Well, this does kind of look like a love child of a Chrysler and a Ford, and you could be forgiven for thinking that. And who's to say that the fellow didn't get his inspiration that way? This car actually started out as a 1951 Ford, just a regular shoebox Ford two-door sedan. In the mid-50s, a fellow by the name of Ron Courtney channeled the car, lowered the body, sectioned it, and he added these incredible fins to the back. He saw where fins were going. He saw that that was the next big thing in automotive styling. He said, I'm going to be ahead of everybody else with the sharpest fins you have ever seen.
What year was this built?
This was built in about the mid-50s, so we'll say 54, 55, something like that. It took a little bit of time to complete the custom work.
And that was when the fins were really starting to take off.
That's when they were starting to take off. They never got higher than they did with Cadillac in 1959, but they had to start somewhere, and these are about as sharp as it got.
Running gear on this?
Running gear on this is a standard Ford. It's a standard Ford, hotted up a little bit to give it its performance commensurate with its looks, but really a very, very reliable car, very much in the idiom of the customs of the day.
Do you get any kind of bizarre reactions or unusual reaction when, say, somebody that's not immersed in the custom car world and is not used to something like this? Do you see them come through and just are befuddled by this, or taken by it, or what kind of reaction?
We get a lot of befuddled reactions. We get a lot of bewilderment, but it's interesting. You know, they look and they go, "What? How did that come about? I want to learn more about that," and they're drawn to the car. And when they figure that Americans after World War II decided that, you know, that we're going to be a group of people that weren't going to wait for Detroit to do anything. If we wanted a car that looked a certain way, we were going to go out and do it. We're not going to wait for anybody else. And keep in mind that in the day you had a lot of returning servicemen that were anxious to apply their newly learned metalworking skills and other fabricating skills to the improvement of their own vehicles.
I'm not sure if Clark Gable should be driving this or 6 or 8 clowns should be driving this. What do we have?
Well, we've got a car that we really don't know what it is. Usually a car comes in and we've fully researched it and we have every detail. But this one is a little bit of a mystery to us. In fact, they call it the mystery car. We know it was built in the 1950s. We don't know by whom and we don't know why. But we do know that it embodies that most 1950s styling feature of fins. And probably the biggest fins in relationship to the rest of the car that ever were. They just tower above the rest of the body in the back. They look an awful lot like the Spohn, which in turn looks like the General Motors LeSabre, and a cross between the 1951 Ford X51. But this is a fiberglass car, and a lot of people had fun with fiberglass because you could mold it to any shape. You could come up with anything you wanted. You make a mold, you put it together, and all of a sudden you had a very lightweight, very rigid structure that you could form to any design.
Mm-hmm. So this is Ford running gear underneath here.
This is Ford running gear. It's got a Ford steering wheel, Ford wheels and axles, and it's pretty basic. Ford was very, very popular back then because they were readily available. You could get parts for them, and inexpensive.
All right, so let's issue a challenge to the viewers. If anybody out there knows the history of this car, you need to get a hold of Leslie here at the Petersen Automotive Museum, or me if you can't track him down, and we'll do something appropriate. If you give the history on this, you'll get something really cool for it. So
love to hear from you if you know.
All right. When I was a young man, one of the people that scared me was Nikita Khrushchev. I thought, this guy's going to blow up the world. And this is the car that he rode around in?
This is one of 2 cars that was built specially for Nikita Khrushchev. He had a couple of them made, and when he was done with them, he actually gave them to János Kadar, the ruler of Hungary in the time. And it was actually one of the cars that Yuri Gagarin owned also, the very famous astronaut.
A lot of people are aware of this car, this style, and there's a belief out there that these were made off of surplus Packard presses. Is that true?
The rumor has been going around for a long time that the U.S. government somehow convinced Packard to give or sell the dies to their obsolete cars to Soviet manufacturers so that they could produce vehicles, maybe get production going on something, and maybe improve the economy in some way. That's really not true. You can definitely say they were inspired by Packard, because if you were to just give this car a passing glance, you would guess it was a Packard right away. The front and the rear, it's very, very Packard-like, but there are no body panels interchangeable. It was all designed from scratch. But certainly inspired.
How does such a historically significant car end up at the Petersen?
We're not sure how this car came into America, but we did buy it from a Russian expatriate that made us aware of the car, and we followed the chain of paperwork, and it was all in perfect order, and it was acquired by Mr. Petersen in a private transaction.
Was it tucked away in a garage in the outskirts of LA somewhere, or was it more prominently somewhere else?
Neither. It was tucked away in a garage in the Midwest, and it was taken out only during the nice sunny days in the spring and summertime.
See, what you need to do now is find the shoes that Khrushchev was wearing when he was banging them on the UN building.
Wouldn't that be interesting? I'd love to find those shoes. If anybody has them, let me know.
Yeah. Well, speaking of interesting, it's not a shoe, but it's a great looking car, so let's go take a look at it.
Let's do it.
This is cute, it's odd, it's unique, it's silly, it's aerodynamic, it's everything. Tell us about this.
Well, sometimes you just have to start with a clean sheet of paper when you're conceiving your dream car, and this is exactly how that came to be. This is called an Airomobile. It's only one built in 1937. It uses a front-wheel drive system, an aircraft engine, and as you can see, very lozenge-like teardrop coachwork. Remember back in the day, the Art Deco movement was really at the forefront. The wide stretches of highway then being built in America were enabling people to go faster and faster for longer and longer distances. And some car manufacturers just weren't going fast enough, as it were. They weren't keeping up with the pace of the market. So a couple of engineers got together and said, you know what, this is exactly the kind of car that the American market needs. This is exactly the kind of car that's going to suit our new driving conditions once we get all these roads built, and everybody will want one.
Mm-hmm. And what happened?
Well, it's okay to be advanced, just don't be too advanced.
Yeah.
Because instead of looking cutting edge and with it, you end up looking a little odd and a little strange. But this car is a favorite of a lot of people that come to the museum. It's really extraordinary, and it does have fins, but they're actually horizontal fins that in a way look like the flukes of a whale.
With it steers in the back, is that right?
No, the steering is actually
okay.
in the front. The rear wheel is just along for the ride, just holds up the back.
Okay. Have you had the opportunity to drive this or talk to anybody that's driven it?
I've not driven this car, but my understanding is it's pretty sprightly, and it will get about 70 miles to the gallon. It's very aerodynamic, and aerodynamics really does help on the road, especially when we're going fast.
So its time has come.
Its time has come. I'm not sure we'll see a lot of three-wheel cars today or tomorrow, but who knows? Again, people take inspiration from a lot of different places, and maybe somebody will come to the Petersen Museum and be inspired by having seen this car.
So they were only about 75 or 80 years ahead of their time then.
Yeah, only 75 or 80, so
yeah.
just a little.
Yeah, well, it's a very cool car, very fun. The last one was odd and goofy and fun. This is sleek and classy. What a car. Tell us about it.
Well, this is as different in concept as you could get from the other car that we just looked at. This is a 1955 Ghia Streamline X. And having named it Streamline, I think you kind of understand where they were going with this idea. They were trying to get a car that was as rational a design as possible, yet still be functional. But they did go, did have their extremes. The front is a really interesting combination of an air intake and concealed headlights and very gently sculpted contours. And the rear is all fantasy. It's all fins. It's a turbine exhaust coming right out of the middle. It's like it landed from the Jetsons age.
Yeah. The running gear on this?
Well, the car originally was not powered, but it was intended to be powered by a turbine engine. The current owner said, why not? Let's do it. Let's put a turbine in. Let's make this car actually move under its own power. That way it can serve as a better educational tool. People will understand the idea and the intent behind the car.
Was the thought that whoever had this designed for them originally, they were going to use this as a prototype or something that was going to be reproduced, or where were they going with this?
Well, Italian coach builders during the 50s and actually throughout time have always built individual design studies. This car doesn't have the name of a car manufacturer. This is a Ghia, which is the name of a coach builder, the Ghia Streamline. So maybe they were thinking that they could attract the attention of a major international manufacturer who might be interested in producing a car that had something like this design.
Mm-hmm. This looks like they were maybe flirting with Chrysler Corporation.
Well, there was certainly a lot of flirting going on between Italy and Chrysler. Ghia was actually a favorite coach builder for Chrysler and built most of their concept cars during the 1950s.
Was it purely financial why the companies went to Italy and had the coach builders there build things? Or they could have something like this built for much cheaper than here, or was it because they were so far ahead or unique in their design ideas?
Well, I think it's a combination of those two things. The Italian coach builders could build a body for maybe $20,000 or $30,000, which sounds like a lot today, but was really hardly anything to a major manufacturer back then. They would have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to take their engineers and to have them build something like this from scratch, design it first, and then go through the intensely laborious process of creating it. Italians also had that innate quality. They seem to bring something to car design that Americans just weren't quite doing at the time. That's why a lot of American manufacturers were looking to Europe for their inspiration.
We have looked at fun cars, funny cars, exotic cars, interesting cars. Here is the epitome of a traditional hot rod.
Here is the archetypical Southern California hot rod, a chopped deuce. Deuce is the name that they gave to Fords that were built in the 1932 model year. They call it Deuce because of the two. And it's the top on this car has actually been chopped, which means they cut a section out of the A and the B pillars and they lowered it for a little bit more sinister, a little bit more aggressive look. Mm-hmm. This car also has an interesting engine adaptation. It has heads on it that were actually designed by the same fellow responsible for the fuel injection unit on the Corvette and other high-performance Corvette adaptations from later. Mm-hmm. Zora Arcus Duntov, and these are R-Dun heads, and R-Dun is actually a contraction of Arcus Duntov.
Right, and the simple thing is they basically turn a flathead into an overhead, right?
This turns an already capable engine that's a flathead into an overhead valve engine that is much, much more efficient than it otherwise would have been.
And if you have one of these, it's kind of like the Hope Diamond or something. You've got something pretty special.
A lot of hot rod enthusiasts even today look long and hard for these heads, and the ones on this car are original. There are reproductions out there, but it's very hard to find a set that's original that somebody's willing to part with.
Well, one of the things that hasn't been hard to find here are incredible cars and great hospitality. So I want to thank you very much for having us on the Vintage Vehicle Show.
You are very, very welcome.
Thank you. And if somebody wants to come here and check out the collection, how do they do it?
Petersen Museum, easy to find. We're at the corner of Wilshire and Fairfax near downtown Los Angeles. But I'd recommend that they go on petersen.org, our website, and get all the information there about the times that we're open, about the times that we offer tours. Anything and everything is easily findable.
Okay, well again, Leslie, thank you very much. And thank you for tuning into the Vintage Vehicle Show. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have a show. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you again next time. Until then, bye-bye.